Stars Beyond the Monolith, Monorisou wo Koeru Sing. Chapter 10, The Last Voyage of the Parker, Dai 10 Parker Ho, Saiho no Konghai. The first failure came at dawn, and it came everywhere at once. Princess Parker watched it happen across her entire monitoring array. Crystal lattice zones that had pulsed steadily for thousands of years suddenly dimming in sequence. The failure spreading not randomly, but with a specific, traceable logic that moved from node to node like something following a path it had already chosen. "This isn't isolated," she said, her voice carrying the particular urgency she rarely allowed herself. "Mom, the entire network is failing simultaneously. Every crystal lattice zone we've mapped, they're all dimming at once." Below, across the planet's surface, the Veylin Order's crystal towers flickered in patterns that had never been recorded in even their oldest traditions. Navigation systems that had guided travelers for generations began returning inconsistent readings. And in the sky, the great migration that had moved with such patient coordination for 3 weeks began, for the first time anyone could remember, to lose its shape. "The dragons," Cassandra said, watching the same data unfold. "Their migration routes are becoming chaotic. They're reacting to the lattice failure same as everything else." She paused. "This is connected," she said. "Systematic, not random failure. Something is moving through the network with a specific pattern." The warning, the command center filled quickly once the alert reached every station. "The entire lattice network is across the main display. A planet-wide web of light, once steady, now flickering in patterns that resembled nothing so much as a body losing its pulse. "I don't have a cause yet. I have a scope, and the scope is total." Amira arrived from the engineering deck at a pace that told everyone something significant before she spoke a word. "The energy surges are reaching orbit," she said. "I'm reading fluctuation in our own systems. The Parker is being affected directly, not catastrophically yet, but the pattern is escalating, and it's escalating fast." Mary absorbed this with the specific, complete stillness she brought to every crisis that mattered most. "Then we move," she said. She did not deliberate further. She did not need to. "Priority 1, she said, her voice carrying across the command center with the clarity that had defined her leadership since the very first rescue. "Protect civilians. Priority 2, preserve every evacuation route we can establish. Priority 3, and only after the first 2 are secured, we investigate the cause." She looked at her family, gathered now around her. "We survive first. We understand later. That order does not change." The collision course. The dragons began moving in earnest within the hour, not the patient, generations-old migration the family had come to understand and respect, but something faster, more disordered. The great creatures responding to a disturbance in the lattice that none of them had a framework to process. Their new path, when Princess finished mapping it, produced a silence on the bridge that lasted several full seconds. "Their migration route now intersects directly with the Parker's orbital position," she said. The Veylin Order's elders, consulted through the family's diplomatic relay, confirmed what their own astonishment had already suggested. "This has never happened," the eldest among them said, her translated words carrying a gravity that needed no embellishment. "In all our records, and our records span longer than your ship has existed, the migration has never crossed paths with anything in the sky above us. The dragons do not collide with what they share their world with. Something has changed the rules they have always followed." Mary looked at the projection. Hundreds of distant dragon silhouettes, enormous and beautiful even now, moving in patterns that no longer held their old coherence. Crystal storms building in their wake as the lattice's failing energy discharged into the atmosphere around them. "Begin emergency evacuation," she said. "Full cooperation with the Veylin Order. Every transport we have, every shelter they have, we move people first." Evacuation. What followed was not chaos. It was, instead, the specific, coordinated grace of 2 civilizations who had spent weeks learning to trust each other, now finding that trust tested at the highest possible stakes, and holding. Veylin knights guided their own people toward shelter routes their families had maintained for generations. The same calm, practical authority that had once watched over storm trial travelers, now extended to a crisis of an entirely different scale. Parker engineering teams worked alongside them without pause, fitting human evacuation technology into ancient infrastructure with the kind of improvised cooperation that no manual had ever anticipated needing. Amira moved between a dozen simultaneous engineering challenges, her sharp competence finally finding the scale of crisis that matched her capability. "Transport Corridor 4 is online," she reported. "Corridor 7 needs another 20 minutes. The crystal interference is scrambling our navigation beacons, so I'm running manual backup guidance through the Schwartz network." "Do it," Mary said. "Whatever keeps people moving." Emergency shelters activated, across the basin and beyond, ancient Veylin architecture and Parker emergency systems, working in a combination neither civilization could have built alone. Transports launched in continuous waves, civilians from both species moving together towards safety with the specific, practiced calm that crisis sometimes produced in people who trusted the ones leading them. Mary oversaw all of it from the Aegis, her presence the steady center, the entire operation organized itself around. Amin coordinated the tactical response from the vanguard, his quiet competence directing frame movements and reconnaissance flights, with an economy of communication that wasted no time on anything but what mattered. 3 frames deploy the Aegis. Mary Parker. Mary's frame became the wall the entire evacuation depended on. She positioned the Aegis at the center of the most critical evacuation corridor, her shield domes extending across kilometers of contested airspace, holding back the crystal storms that built in the wake of the lattice's failing energy. Transport after transport passed beneath her protection, each one a small, precious cargo of lives, are moving towards safety because the path ahead of them had bien made survivable. Corridor holding, she reported, her voice carrying the same steady calm it had carried through every crisis this family had faced. Continue the evacuation. I have this. The vanguard, Amin Parker. Amin moved through the disordered migration with the patient, precise economy that had always defined him, not fighting the dragons, never fighting them, but redirecting their disoriented flight paths away from the evacuation corridors. With the same careful technique he had once used to calm a single creature in the storm basin, he used his complete mastery of every martial discipline he carried, translated through the Vanguard's aerial systems, into something that looked, from a distance, almost like a dance. Precise, controlled, entirely focused on guidance rather than confrontation. Redirecting the Northern Flight Group, he reported. They're responding. They don't want to be here any more than we want them here. They're frightened, not hostile. The Cyber Viper. Cassandra Brown. Cassandra worked the problem at its source, her frame sensors reaching deep into the failing lattice, building a model of the collapse that grew clearer with every minute despite the chaos surrounding her analysis. And in that analysis, she found something that changed everything. The discovery. They're not causing this, Cassandra said, her voice cutting through the command channel with the specific clarity of someone who has just understood something essential. The dragons. They're not the disaster. They're responding to one. Explain, Mary said, holding her position without breaking focus. The crystal lattice is broadcasting something, Cassandra said. A distress pattern, buried in the failure signature. The dragons aren't moving erratically because they're disturbed by random chaos. They're moving toward the failing nodes, toward the parts of the network in greatest distress. They're trying to help the same way they always have. The network is collapsing faster than they can compensate for it, but the dragons aren't the crisis. She paused, the full weight of the realization settling into her voice. The lattice itself is what's failing, catastrophically, and it's failing faster than any natural cycle the Veylin records describe. This was, Cassandra understood even as she said it, the kind of discovery that reshaped an entire crisis. Not erasing the danger, but reframing exactly where that danger came from and what it asked of them. Then the dragons aren't the problem we redirect, Amin said. They're allies trying to do the same work we're doing. Yes, Cassandra said. The decision, the damage report from Amira arrived 20 minutes later, and it arrived with a weight that settled over the entire command center the moment she finished speaking. The Parker has sustained structural failure across 6 major sections, she said. Her voice, usually sharp with confidence even under pressure, carried something heavier now. The energy surges reaching orbit are worse than we projected. I've run every stabilization model I have. I can't bring the readings back into safe parameters. Not with the time we have. Not with the tools we have. She looked at the data one more time as if hoping it would change. The ship cannot be fully stabilized. Repairs aren't possible under current conditions. The command deck went silent. 1 billion people had called the Parker home for generations. It had carried humanity across the stars, had been the platform from which every rescue, every alliance, every discovery this family had achieved had been launched. It was not simply a vessel, it was the only home most of its passengers had ever known. Mary looked at the data for a long moment. Then she looked at her family. Continue the evacuation, she said. We do not risk a single life trying to save the ship. The people come first. They have always come first. Her voice did not waver. Get everyone we can to the surface. Everyone, that is the only priority remaining. It was, in the specific way that her family would understand for the rest of their long lives, the clearest possible expression of everything Mary Parker had ever stood for. The last stand. The remaining evacuation stretched across hours that felt, to everyone involved, both impossibly long and far too short. The 3 frames held their positions through everything the failing lattice and the disordered sky could produce. Crystal storm shockwaves that the Aegis absorbed and dispersed. Dragonflight paths that the Vanguard continued patiently redirecting, even as the creature's distress deepened. Data streams that the Cyber Viper processed continuously to keep every transport informed of the safest available route. Below, on the surface, Veylin Knights and Parker engineers worked side by side without distinction between species, passing supplies, guiding families, holding shelter doors open for the last stragglers of every wave. Transport 11 cleared, Cassandra reported. Transport 12 cleared, came moments later. Transport 13, that's the last of the primary evacuation wave, Amira said. Checking for any remaining stragglers now. Amin redirected one final group of dragons away from the departing transport's flight path. The great creatures responding to his patient, practiced presence with the same trust they had shown since the storm basin. "Clear," he reported. "All remaining rescue routes are open." Mary held the Aegis's shield through the transport's full departure, watching it clear the danger zone with the specific, complete attention she gave to every life she was responsible for. "Confirm full evacuation," she said. "The final departure." "Confirming now," Cassandra said, running the final count against every manifest, every shelter report, every transport log the crisis had generated. The numbers resolved, one by one, into a picture she had been hoping for since the moment Amira's damage report had arrived. "Evacuation complete. Every recorded civilian, human and Veylin both, has reached safety on the surface." The relief in her voice was not performed. "All remaining rescue routes are clear," Amin confirmed. Mary held the silence for one full breath, the specific weighted pause of a captain who understood exactly what came next, and was giving herself, briefly, the moment to feel its full size before issuing the order it required. "Withdraw," she said. The end of the Parker. The 3 frames retreated from the failing ship's position, descending toward the surface where the evacuated population now watched, gathered in the thousands across the basin's edge, looking up at the sky their new home would forever associate with this single enormous moment. Above them, the Parker remained suspended among the crystal storms, and the disordered, beautiful silhouettes of a migration still finding its way back to coherence. The vessel that had carried humanity across the stars for generations, that had been home to 1 billion lives, that had answered every distress call this family had ever found the courage to answer, held its position a final time. There was no detailed destruction to the witness, no tragedy rendered in close, painful focus. Only distance, light scattered and refracted through crystal storm and dragonwing, silhouettes growing smaller as the 3 frames carried their pilots toward the surface and the family that waited there. The watching population understood, without needing further explanation, exactly what they were witnessing. Nothing more needed to be said. The new home. Several days later, a temporary settlement had risen at the basin's edge, human structures and Veylin architecture combining with the same improvised, hopeful cooperation that had carried the evacuation itself. Humans and Veylin worked together now, not as allies meeting occasionally, but as neighbors building something permanent. Children from both species, drawn together by curiosity, that needed no translation are, had already begun inventing games that crossed every boundary their elders were still learning to navigate. The 3 mobile frames stood at the settlement's edge, not deployed for combat, simply present, the specific, steady quality of guardians who had chosen to stay. Cassandra stood near them, looking up at a sky that no longer held the ship that had carried her entire life across the centuries. Mary came to stand beside her. "We came here searching for answers," Cassandra said quietly, the weight of everything that had happened settling into something she could finally voice aloud. "Now, this world has become our home." Mary said nothing immediately. She simply stood beside her granddaughter, looking at the same sky, carrying the same loss with the specific, dignified steadiness that had defined every difficult moment of her extraordinarily long life. Amin came to stand on Cassandra's other side, quiet, as always, his presence saying everything his words did not need to. Below them, the settlement continued its careful, hopeful work. Around them, a world that had once needed rescuing now offered something back in return, a place to stand, a community willing to share it, and a future that remained, despite everything they had lost, genuinely uncertain. But humanity had survived, and somewhere in that uncertain future, Cassandra understood that the answers they had originally come searching for were still waiting. They would simply have to find them from here. End of chapter 10. The last voyage of the Parker Estrellas más allá del monolito, monorisú voyage. Capítulo 10. El último viaje del Parker. Di 10 PARKER号, Saigo no Hankai. El primer fallo llegó al amanecer, y llegó en todas partes a la vez. Princess Parker lo vio suceder a través de todo su array de monitoreo. Zonas de retícula de cristal que habían pulsado constantemente durante miles de años, atenuándose repentinamente en secuencia, el fallo extendiéndose no aleatoriamente sino con una lógica específica y rastreable, que se movía de nodo a nodo como algo siguiendo un camino que ya había elegido. «Esto no está aislado», dijo, su voz llevando la urgencia particular que rara vez se permitía. «Mamá, toda la red está desestabilizándose simultáneamente. Cada zona de retícula de cristal que hemos mapeado, todas se están atenuando a la vez. Abajo, a través de la superficie del planeta, las torres de cristal de la Orden Veylin parpadeaban en patrones que nunca habían sido registrados, ni en sus tradiciones más antiguas. Y en el cielo, la gran migración que se había movido con tan paciente coordinación durante 3 semanas, comenzó, por primera vez que alguien pudiera recordar, a perder su forma. Los dragones, dijo Cassandra, observando los mismos datos desarrollarse. Sus rutas de migración se están volviendo caóticas. Están reaccionando al fallo de la retícula igual que todo lo demás. Hizo una pausa. Esto está conectado, dijo. Sistemático, no un fallo aleatorio. Algo se mueve a través de la red, con un patrón específico. La advertencia. Toda la red de Retícula está desestabilizándose. Reporto, Princess. El alcance completo de sus datos, ahora proyectado a través de la pantalla principal. Amira llegó desde la cubierta de ingeniería a un ritmo que le dijo a todos algo significativo antes de que dijera una palabra. Las sobrecargas de energía están llegando a la órbita, dijo. Estoy leyendo fluctuaciones en nuestros propios sistemas. El Parker está siendo afectado directamente. Mary absorbió esto con la quietud específica y completa que traía a cada crisis que más importaba. Entonces nos movemos, dijo. Prioridad 1, dijo, su voz levando, a través del centro de comando, con la claridad que había definido su liderazgo desde el primer rescate. Proteger a los civiles. Prioridad 2, preservar cada ruta de evacuación que podamos establecer. Prioridad 3, y solo después de que las primeras dos estén aseguradas, investigamos la causa. Miró a su familia, reunida ahora a su alrededor. Sobrevivimos primero, entendemos después. Ese orden no cambia. El curso de colisión. Los dragones comenzaron a moverse en serio dentro de la hora. Su nueva ruta de migración ahora intersecta directamente con la posición orbital del Parker, dijo Princess. Esto nunca ha sucedido, dijo la mayor entre los Veylin, sus palabras traducidas llevando una gravedad que no necesitaba adorno. En todos nuestros registros, la migración nunca ha cruzado caminos con nada en el cielo sobre nosotros. Mary miró la proyección. Cientos de siluetas distantes de dragones, enormes y hermosas incluso ahora, moviéndose en patrones que ya no mantenían su antigua coherencia. Comiencen la evacuación de emergencia, dijo. Cooperación total con la Orden Veylin. Evacuación. Lo que siguió no fue caos. Fue, en cambio, la gracia específica y coordinada de dos civilizaciones que habían pasado semanas aprendiendo a confiar entre sí, ahora encontrando esa confianza probada en las más altas apuestas posibles, y resistiendo. Amira se movió entre una docena de desafíos de ingeniería simultáneos. El corredor de transporte 4 está en línea, reportó. El corredor 7 necesita otros 20 minutos. ¡Hazlo!, dijo Mary, lo que sea que mantenga a la gente moviéndose. Mary supervisó todo desde el Aegis. Eamon coordinó la respuesta táctica desde el Vanguard. 3 frames se despliegan el Aegis. Mary Parker. El frame de Mary se convirtió en el muro del cual dependía toda la evacuación. Corredor sosteniéndose, reportó. Continúen la evacuación. Yo tengo esto. El Vanguard. Amin Parker. Amin se movió a través de la migración, desordenada con la economía paciente y precisa que siempre lo había definido, nunca luchando contra los dragones, sino redirigiendo sus rutas de vuelo desorientadas. Redirigiendo al grupo de vuelo norte, reportó. Están respondiendo, están asustados, no son hostiles. El Cyber Viper, Cassandra Brown. Cassandra trabajó el problema en su fuente, encontrando algo que cambió todo, el descubrimiento. No están causando esto, dijo Cassandra. Los dragones, no son el desastre, están respondiendo a uno. Explica, dijo Mary. La retícula de cristal está transmitiendo algo, dijo Cassandra. Un patrón de socorro, enterrado en la firma del fallo. Los dragones no se mueven erráticamente, porque están perturbados por caos aleatorio. Se mueven hacia los nodos fallando, hacia las partes de la red de mayor angustia. Están tratando de ayudar de la misma manera que siempre lo han hecho. Hizo una pausa. La retícula misma es lo que está fallando, catastróficamente. Entonces, los dragones no son el problema que redirigimos, dijo Amin. Son aliados intentando hacer el mismo trabajo que estamos haciendo. Sí, dijo Cassandra. La decisión, el reporte de daños de Amira, llegó 20 minutos después. El Parker ha sufrido fallo estructural a través de 6 secciones principales, dijo. No puedo traer las lecturas de vuelta a parámetros seguros, no con el tiempo que tenemos. Miró los datos una vez más. El barco no puede ser completamente estabilizado. Las reparaciones no son posibles bajo las condiciones actuales. La cubierta de comando quedó en silencio. Mary miró los datos por un largo momento. Luego miró a su familia. Continúen la evacuación, dijo. No arriesgamos ni una sola vida intentando salvar la nave. La gente viene primero. Siempre ha venido primero. Su voz no vaciló. Lleven a todos los que puedan a la superficie. Esa es la única prioridad que queda. La última resistencia. Los 3 frames mantuvieron sus posiciones a través de todo lo que la retícula fallando y el cielo desordenado podían producir. Transporte 11 despejado, reportó Cassandra. Transporte 12 despejado. Llegó momentos después. Transporte 13. Esa es la última de la ola de evacuación primaria, dijo Amira. Amin redirigió un último grupo de dragones, lejos del camino de vuelo del transporte que partía. Despejado, reportó. Todas las rutas de rescate restantes están abiertas. Mary mantuvo el escudo del Aegis a través de la partida completa del transporte. Confirmen evacuación completa, las dijo. La partida final. Confirmando ahora, dijo Cassandra. Evacuación completa.
Cada civil registrado, humano y Veylin, ha llegado a salvo a la superficie. Todas las rutas de rescate restantes están despejadas, confirmó Eamon. Mary sostuvo el silencio por una respiración completa. Retirada, dijo. El fin del Parker. Los 3 frames se retiraron de la posición de la nave fallando, descendiendo hacia la superficie donde la población evacuada ahora observaba. Arriba de ellos, el Parker permaneció suspendido entre las tormentas de cristal y las siluetas desordenadas y hermosas de una migración todavía encontrando su camino de vuelta a la coherencia. La nave que había llevado a la humanidad a través de las estrellas durante generaciones sostuvo su posición una última vez. No hubo destrucción detallada que presenciar, ninguna tragedia renderizada en enfoque cercano y doloroso. Solo distancia. Luz dispersada y refractada a través de tormenta de cristal y ala de dragón. Siluetas, volviéndose más pequeñas mientras los 3 frames llevaban a sus pilotos hacia la superficie y la familia que esperaba allí. La población observadora entendió, sin necesitar más explicación, exactamente lo que estaban presenciando. No se necesitaba decir nada más. El nuevo hogar. Varios días después, un asentamiento temporal había surgido en el borde de la cuenca. Humanos y Veylin trabajaban juntos ahora, no como aliados que se encuentran ocasionalmente, sino como vecinos construyendo algo permanente. Los 3 frames móviles estaban de pie en el borde del asentamiento, no desplegados para combate, simplemente presentes. Cassandra estaba cerca de ellos, mirando hacia un cielo que ya no contenía la nave que había elevado toda su vida a través de los siglos. Mary vino a pararse a su lado. Vinimos aquí buscando respuestas, dijo Cassandra en voz baja. Ahora este mundo se ha convertido en nuestro hogar. Mary no dijo nada inmediatamente. Simplemente se quedó junto a su nieta, mirando el mismo cielo. Eamon vino a pararse al otro lado de Cassandra, silencioso, como siempre. Abajo de ellos, el asentamiento continuaba su trabajo cuidadoso y esperanzador. A su alrededor, un mundo que una vez necesitó rescate ahora ofrecía algo a cambio, un lugar para estar, una comunidad dispuesta a
compartirlo, y un futuro que permanecía, a pesar de Cassandra y todo lo que habían perdido, genuinamente incierto. Pero la humanidad había sobrevivido, y en algún lugar en ese futuro incierto, entendió, las respuestas que originalmente habían venido a buscar todavía esperaban. Simplemente tendrían que encontrarlas desde aquí. Fin del capítulo 10. El último viaje del Parker.